Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our Reach 2 Project Zoom community meeting. My name is Margaret Bruce, and I'm the Executive Director of the San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority. To start off with, let's take care of some quick housekeeping items. Everyone attending has been muted to make sure we keep good sound quality. We want you to use the Q&A function, not the chat. Please look for that now. It should be at the bottom of your toolbar on your Zoom screen. We will read and answer as many questions as we can after the presentation, which will be about 30 minutes long. The communities next to the creek get flooded. This is the reason that the SFCJPA exists. Community leaders from all 5 member jurisdictions can come together to resolve the challenges that emerge from the complexities of implementing the solutions to a problem that crosses many jurisdictions. No single organization acting alone can accomplish all that is needed. As you may recall, there was some flooding on New Year's Eve in 2022. We learned that the channel was 25% smaller than we thought it was, and that the existing project designs were insufficient. Going back to the drawing board after the New Year's Eve event has meant opening up some old worries and some ardent desires about the Reach 2 project. The Reach 2 project will always be a set of combined actions that together will provide the desired level of protection in the ways that our community wants. One part of the project, widening, is a no regrets action. It doesn't add to flooding, and we don't think it will induce flooding at high flows in new places. It is also the thing that must be done first before other project elements are implemented. However, with this draft report, we've learned that widening alone can't accomplish the 7,200 cubic feet per second capacity goal for this project. In the course of this work, we've heard a mix of concerns and priorities from the community, our board members, our member agency staff colleagues, and those include a reaffirmation of the goal of the 7,200 cubic feet per second or flood of record flood protection level, identifying which aspects of the project can be done soon and as soon as possible, a desire to understand and, if possible, decide on the whole project with all of its constituent parts understood, even if the project is constructed in phases. There are concerns that project negative impacts and project benefits are not distributed equitably. There's a keen interest in exploring solutions other than flood walls and minimizing negative impacts to trees on both banks of the creek. And the concern over costs is very real. Project planning and design is expensive, and so is construction. Community members have been trying to address these issues associated with flooding on the San Francisco Creek for more than 100 years. And I want to emphasize that if this project was easy, it would have been done already. So it's complicated on so many levels. There are equity issues. It's technically difficult. There are regulatory, environmental, and physical constraints and costs and community expectations. With that, I want to thank and acknowledge our colleagues at WRA Environmental for their expert consulting support that has gotten us this far, and our member agency colleagues who have put in significant time, effort, and thoughtful expertise in reviewing and commenting throughout this process. Now, my colleagues Tess Byler, Senior Project Manager, and Deneen Nee, Project Manager, will present a summary of the WRA Project Alternatives Report and the preliminary JPA staff recommendations. We think it's important for the community to hear what has been considered so far and to recognize that this is preliminary, and we want to hear your comments, your questions, your concerns, and your vision for this project. We will collect all questions and comments. Again, please use the Q&A function. We will answer as many as we can today, and we will compile responses and publish those to our website soon. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleagues, Tess Byler, Deneen Nee, our expert consultant, Angela Hogan from WRA, and our clerk of the board and mistress of ceremonies, Miko Harris Parker. Tess and Deneen, take it away.
Thank you, Margaret. So I'm Tess Byler, and this is a little bit more information than what we presented at our last board meeting. We've tried to summarize the report a little bit better because we recognize it's a big, hefty report. So I'll be presenting parts of it, and Deneen and I will be teaming on this. And this is what we're going to say. So what was the report purpose? Why did we do it? What is a summary of the report? What alternatives were evaluated and what was the highest ranked alternative? What are the key findings from the report? And then what are our recommendations? And then just a little bit on the constraints and limitations and uncertainties that Margaret alluded to in this hard to this section of the creek. Next slide. So the report intent and purpose is really what we wanted to do is revisit all the past alternatives to reduce risk of flooding in the Reach 2. We wanted to also explore new alternatives both within and outside of Reach 2 that were able to meet the project goals. And then this report is really intended to summarize a watershed level approach that's been evaluated by WRA. And we hope to move forward with a phased approach. So this is just a brief history. Margaret alluded to the 100 years. One of our residents who's been around a while sent us a lot of articles, and I was shocked to learn that 1901, 1908, 1912, 1950, 1960, multiple unsuccessful attempts were made to reduce San Francisco Creek flooding. And the reasons are always the same. It was cost, and it was people felt that they were being inequitably charged, like they didn't think that they were causing flooding or were going to get big flooding, so they just refused to pay. And so that is a summary of the exact history of it. In 1998, we did have this flood of record, and from that, a lot of political will came and the JPA was created. In 2019, our board adopted our environmental and impact report. It was finalized. It's programmatic for all of the upstream area and project level for specific elements within Reach 2. And in 2022, in July, we had design plans and permit applications were submitted to the resource agencies. And then December 31st, we had this major flood that realized that the hydraulic model, which was the basis of our design, underestimated the creek's capacity. So the graphic is just showing you a little bit about what the Reach 2 is. So what does a 7,200 CFS flood do? It floods the creek. And it's really clear from this graphic that the pinch points are around the Pope Chaucer Bridge. It is the area of least capacity in the creek. So when floods happen, it squeezes out at Pope Chaucer Bridge. And depending on the storm, because all storms are different, the one that we had in 2022, the creek was already bank full, and we found out that the water squeezed out in many different areas. So these are just a listing of the overtopping locations, which many of you are probably familiar with. And then the shading of the pink is related to how deep it is. And in some areas, the water can be as deep as 3 feet deep and far away from where it originally comes out after the creek. And many of you may know, but the creek has what are these natural levees. So once the water leaves the creek, it does not go back in. So our project design goals, these were reaffirmed by our board in January 2025, and they are essentially the same goals that were in the 2019 EIR. And so it's protect life, property, and infrastructure from floodwaters exiting the creek for flows up to 7,200 cubic feet per second, while minimizing impacts on the project to the adjacent communities and the environment. Enhance habitat within the project area, particularly interconnected habitat for threatened and endangered species which occur in the creek. Create new recreational opportunities and connect to existing bike and pedestrian corridors. and then minimize operational and maintenance requirements. And then the last one is to not preclude future actions, because this project is not a 100-year flood protection project. It is only designed for an approximate 70-year event, which is the same thing as the 1998 flood of record. So the parcels that would be protected from this storm, this is just a quick glance at with the actions in this report. All of the parcels that were previously flooded would be protected after this project would be completed. In Menlo Park, that's about 900 parcels. In East Palo Alto, slightly over 1,200. And in Palo Alto, about 3,000. And then because we know and we love trees ourselves, we also took a look at estimated tree loss by city. And this list is incomplete because it doesn't include trees impacted upstream of Pope Chaucer Bridge between the widening locations, Site B in its entirety, and at Middlefield Road Bridge. But it's very similar to the tree count in the it's more than the tree count in the 2019 EIR, but the relative apportion with the fewest trees in Menlo Park and then East Palo Alto and Palo Alto being pretty similar. And this picture is a picture of this large concrete structure in the creek by Woodland Avenue. And we have committed to saving the beautiful buckeye that preserves along with as many trees as we can that shades Woodland Avenue in this area. Our arborist said it was one of the finest specimens that they had seen.
All right.
So now I'm going to pass it over to Deneen.
Yeah, thanks, Tess. Yeah, so we know the report was very long, so I want to give a quick summary of what the report talks about. WRA, in order to develop the report, WRA reassessed the 17 alternatives that were presented in the 2019 EIR, as well as assessed 3 brand new alternatives. With this assessment, they identified 6 near-term actions that could be completed in Reach 2, and as well as 5 future actions that would be outside of the Reach 2 extent. The future actions would require coordination with stakeholders that are outside of our member entities' jurisdictions or would require additional analysis. With member entity staff input, we developed a comprehensive evaluation criteria to score and rank these alternatives. So this is the criteria weighting process. We looked at over 15 different detailed evaluation criteria. And we really want to emphasize this because we looked at much more than just some of the criteria that we had before, which were just 1 or 2 and mostly were related to cost or how long it took to construct. We got input from our member entities on the weighting factors of all of these evaluation criteria groups, but we'd also want your feedback after this community meeting so that you could weigh in on these weighting factors and let us know what's important for you. So these are the 6 near-term actions that WRA identified, and I will go into some detail about each of these actions in a little bit. So here's an overview of the 4 alternatives that WRA talked about in the report. All of these alternatives include one action at Pope Chaucer Bridge, channel widening, and flood walls all throughout the creek. The main differentiating factors between these alternatives is what we do at Pope Chaucer Bridge and the extent of the widening. So in alternatives 1 and 2, we have a complete replacement of the bridge, which would open up the channel fully underneath. This is based on the design by NV5 that was completed in 2020. Next, alternatives 3 and 4 looked at a bridge modification with culverts. And in this option, we would construct 5 new culverts on the wing walls of the Pope Chaucer Bridge. And this would retain the existing Pope Chaucer Bridge structure. There will be 3 culverts on one side that are 11 by 18 feet. The other side are 9 by 18 feet. Originally, we were looking at this alternative because we thought it would preserve the park-like feature that's at Pope Chaucer Bridge, but afterwards we realized for cost and due to complexity, due to the structure's age, that would not be possible. And also, in constructing the new culverts does add complexities, including sediment buildup and debris buildup. And so I'm sure a lot of you have noticed the one big action that we've proposed in the report are flood walls. And these flood walls extend all throughout the creek, including upstream of Pope Chaucer Bridge, as well as around Middlefield Road Bridge. And flood walls are needed to reach the design capacity of 7,800 CFS. The average height of all of these flood walls would rise around 3 feet above the road grade. And at the top of bank, the range of these flood walls would be between 2 and 5 feet. So in all the alternatives, we also proposed channel widening. In alternatives 1 and 3, we would widen on both sides of the creek, which is around 4,600 linear feet. And alternatives 2 and 4 would be just on one side of the creek, so around 2,300 linear feet. With these tiebacks, we would excavate the creek to widen the creek width and install retaining walls. And these retaining walls would require tiebacks due to the size. We expect that these tiebacks would require up to 60 feet of easement, which is a very conservative estimate. In addition to channel widening, we've also proposed log crib walls for bank stabilization in the widening areas. We're in the alternatives where we widen on both sides of the creek, we would construct log crib walls on both sides. And where we widen on just one side of the creek, we would have the log crib wall, the big log crib wall on one side where we widen, and also a small log crib wall on the right side, on the other side of the bank, where we would not widen. But this log crib wall would provide additional stability for the widening areas, would also provide habitat enhancement and also refugia for fish. So in the report, we talk about different types of flood walls. Here are just some examples of the ones we talked about. We have your traditional fixed flood wall, and here's an example of one that we've installed down in Reach 1. And another example is the architecturally finished flood walls at Coyote Creek. We want to show you this picture because we want to share that although there are we are installing flood walls, there are ways to make the flood walls more aesthetically pleasing and match with the rest of the area. And in addition to traditional fixed flood walls, we also looked at passive flood walls and glass flood walls. The two types of passive flood walls we looked at were horizontal flood walls and vertical. These are different just in the way in how they lie in the ground, but passive flood walls in general, they would lie in the ground and remain hidden until they are automatically deployed by incoming water. With glass flood walls, they are fixed, but the upper portion would be glass, and it will help preserve the natural views of the creek and also improve visibility in tight areas where flood walls are necessary, such as along Woodland Avenue. And very quickly, these are the 5 future actions that WRA have identified in the report. The first one is offline detention in using upstream detention basins in Reach 3. The second is a modification to the Stanford Searsville Reservoir project. We expect that this project would be able to retain peak flows of up to 800 cubic feet per second. And these two actions, offline detention and the Searsville project, are vetted actions, which means that they've been studied in the past and have been shown to be applicable to reducing flood risk in the creek. The other 3 actions are non-vetted, which means they require further analysis to determine whether they are feasible in our creek. First is to modify bridges such as Middlefield, University, or the private pedestrian bridges. These bridges are constrictions in the creek, and being able to remove them would provide additional flood risk reduction. One other option is flow diversion, where we would connect excess flood flows to existing or proposed storm drains or tunnels. There's one option where we looked at diverting flows to Atherton Channel or Matadero Creek. And lastly, we looked at attenuating peak flows, which acts similarly to peak flow reduction. This would be adding large woody debris in the upstream portions of the creek that have capacity and retaining the water there. Right, so in the report, we do have a highest ranking alternative, and the alternative is alternative 2. And alternative 2 ranks the highest amongst all the 4 because it proposes the Pope Chaucer Bridge replacement as well as widening on just one side of the creek. The bridge replacement scores higher than modification of culverts since it results in a brand new structure that reduces O&M needs, removes obstructions in the creek, and provides more climate change resiliency and adaptability. Widening on one side of the creek compared to both banks also scores higher because it causes much less disturbance in the creek, it reduces the real estate complexities required, and is much more cost effective. And this table just shows a summary of the final scores of the evaluation. But of course, we want your input on the weighting factors. We want your input on what's important to you. And yeah, feel free to tell us what you think about how you would rank these alternatives. And here's a before and after rendering of alternative 2, where we widen on just one side of the creek. And this is located at Cooley and Woodland Avenue. You'll see on the left-hand side of your screen, that's what it looks like now. And afterwards, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see in WRA's report, they also propose recreational trails that can improve the quality of life after this project is completed. And lastly, here is a high-level feasibility cost estimate of all 4 alternatives. The costs range from 120 to 170 million, depending on what actions are within each alternative. And I can pass it back to Tess for our key findings from the report.
Thanks, Deneen. So that really just as we've figured out, and Margaret said it before, that no single action is going to be able to meet that design goal of 7,200. So we're proposing actions in a phased manner. And then each action would have an incremental increase in channel capacity. And so then really to avoid undue transfer of risk to communities downstream, we are going to be working as we did the Reach 1 and then upstream to downstream. And as Deneen mentioned, this feasibility level cost estimate is 120 to 170 million. And then these are just kind of listing some of the actions that and what you might get. So widening, you improve it to about 6,000. The flood walls would get you 7,200, and as well as Pope Chaucer. And then Reach 3 upstream detention would be it's not really a additional capacity, but it's holding it back, and that's the way it's shown on this graphic. So the one thing we learned in the middle of this project was that in the draft report that our member agencies reviewed, there is remaining risk once we implemented all these actions from Pope Chaucer on. There's residual risk from flooding that backs up at the Middlefield Road Bridge. So as has been mentioned, our EIR really did include the upstream area, but it was at a programmatic level. So WRA and I went out in early April and performed a hand survey that indicated that the model elevations were not correct. So in this particular area, we really want to figure out what the issues are and figure it out. So what happened in the current report, in every alternative, WRA added flood walls up to 3 feet around the Middlefield Road Bridge to address this overtopping. And we did we commissioned Schaff and Wheeler to take a look at the storm drains on the Palo Alto side of the creek, and those results we got at the board meeting, and the storm drains are at capacity, and you do not get any additional benefit from the storm drains because they're tapped out already. So then this last part, there's actually 2 more parts, but these are just our recommendations based on the report that's been developed. So the first one, we would be asking our board to make a decision on this. When we looked at replacing the Pope Chaucer Bridge or retrofitting it, we initially were very optimistic. Oh, we can keep the park-like feature, but no, none of those things happened. So it was a con. We're able to keep the existing structure and maybe the visual look of the bridge, but we would lose that park-like feature. And second, as the bridge was built in the 40s. It's close to the end of its service life. And then, so that was on the pro. And it seemed like when we went through everything, the bridge replacement is expected to reduce future O&M needs. The culvert would have backup debris and brush in it, would have a lot more O&M, and the bridge would remain a culvert, so it would not have a natural creek bottom. The new bridge has a natural creek bottom. And then it was included as an alternative in the EIR, but it wasn't recommended. We looked at it again, and now we feel like we've buttoned that up, and we will be recommending to our board to replace the Pope Chaucer Bridge. And finally, the cost on both were about the same, about 12 million each. So that was that. In channel widening, the options that were looked at in the report was widen on both banks or widen on one bank only. And what we decided is that we would like to move forward with widening at the EIR sites 1 through 4 as optimized with the certified model from the Army Corps of Engineer. And it could be on left bank, it could be on the right bank. It's whatever makes the best sense for the creek, considering all of the criteria that we're evaluating things against. And then very definitely, widening the creek, it provides diminishing returns. So it does not make sense to just widen it as much as possible. First of all, you can't get the capacity that we need. Secondly, it's very expensive and there's diminishing returns. And then it's probably obvious to everybody, but removing man-made constrictions that are in the creek and then widening at known pinch points is really a no regrets action that we are recommending moving forward with. So here are our recommendations, and we've broken them out to phases. So the first thing that we're thinking of is this alternatives evaluation report. We're estimating would be finalized about September 2025. We would be confirming the draft evaluation using the Army Corps of Engineers certified model. And second, we would conclude any evaluations of other potential bypass stormwater actions before this report is finalized. The next thing is we would move forward with final design and permitting to remove those man-made constrictions in the creek and widen at key bottlenecks, replace that temporary wooden flood wall that you see at the top of the picture, and replace the Pope Chaucer Bridge. These were all elements of the draft permit applications, and we would move forward to permit these items. And then I think the third big thing that we can get out of this report based on the parcels that would be protected is I think it allows our board to develop a cost share framework for the Reach 2 project based on the parcels by city. And then this is our phase 2, which we would bid and award the work to remove these man-made constrictions, widen and stabilize the banks, and achieve additional capacity in the creek. And this would happen after the Newell Road Bridge replacement project is complete, estimated 2027. But that project has been bid and it's going to be under construction this next year. Then we would move forward with project's elements after widening. So we would replace the Pope Chaucer Bridge concurrently with selected flood risk reduction option, estimated 2028-29. We would construct actions at the Middlefield Road Bridge area. And so, for example, if a non-structural action is possible, like raising the curbs from 4 inches to 6 inches or a foot, or the small flood walls that were determined to be sufficient, we think we can handle that. And then the last thing is we would continue to evaluate additional flood protection elements that would for the 100-year flood event, because we realize that many people still have the burden of flood risk reduction insurance, and we would still continue to evaluate this option. But as I've said, that this project would not get anybody out of flood insurance. It's a 70-year project. And then the pictures are just showing evaluation of the storm drain capacity, which is one of the things we want to look at. And then one of the things that we learned in this report are these private pedestrian bridges can create a little bit of a backwater as well as do the other bridges. And so this would be these future actions that would layer on additional protection. And then just some of the constraints and limitations of this. Margaret's already talked about the fully developed urbanized floodplains. We all, houses and businesses are there. There's all kinds of infrastructure in it. The creek itself is incised. And we've talked a little bit about the bridge constrictions that back up water. And then, of course, we have to balance the public need for flood risk reduction and private property constraints. And then, of course, there's always data limitations. Some of the survey data, as we talked about by Middlefield Road, does not match it. And we've got some questions on elevation. Hydraulic modeling itself has uncertainties, and the USACE technical review is completed, and then just, it's intrinsically uncertain. So to account for some of this uncertainty, we are adding a factor of safety, which we call freeboard, into all of the evaluations. And then finally, sediment transport. We know that there's a project that's proposed upstream. And so we don't have a detailed sediment model, but we've been working with Stanford University, and we will be figuring out different runs using their sediment model. Although WRA has included a qualitative assessment, and they'll have a more formal analysis during the design phase. And so with that, we want to hear from you. And I think I've seen a couple of questions already in the Q&A box. So I think I see two in there, and one that's been answered. So John Henley's got a question about what success cases in California can we point to where flood walls interacted well with both unhoused populations and local homeowners. I don't know exactly what this question's asking, but what I think I understood from some of the comments previously is residents are worried that the flood walls would cause a barrier and increase homelessness in the creek. And we know from the Napa example that when you increase recreational trails on it, there's a decreased amount of homeless in the creek. Margaret, do you have something else to say there?
I was just going to chime in on that example, and we understand that it's important, and we can look for some other case studies in case there is other informative information out there. I think it's an important point.
And that is all the questions I see in the chat. If you don't feel like you can now kind of raise your hand if you've got a question, and we'll try to answer it live. So Susan Thompson. Miko, can you unmute Susan and she can ask her question?
Susan has been unmuted. Susan, you may speak.
Yeah, the question is, how do we get a copy of the report?
The report is on our website right now. So you just go to sfcjpa.org and then you go to Reach to Project, and it's right there. It's got in bold. Any other questions? And it's not a time limit. Okay.
There's a question in the Q&A from Shani Kleinhaus, who asks, glass walls along the creek could be a hazard for birds?
I guess I would say that you can always do bird-friendly glass, because I've seen that happen. I hadn't looked into it. It's one of the things that we're hoping to evaluate between now as the design progresses. I see Shani has a raised hand.
Tess, I believe Shawnee's question was just answered, but we have another question from Hamilton, or a comment from Hamilton Hitchings regarding the flood walls. Well, they would average 3 feet high.
Three, yeah. I think that's in the report. They're average about 3 feet high, similar to many of the areas. And then the maximum height would be 5 feet. All of this information is in the report.
And Bruce McCall has written into the Q&A, when might we see detailed designs of the flood walls at each elevation? Some of this is going to be dependent upon I think we're probably going to be doing a supplemental environmental impact report, or SEIR, as we consider the greater extent of flood walls than was previously contemplated in our 2019 approved EIR. So we will be advancing those designs, but the exact details probably won't be ready for Angela, I'm taking a wag here. A 30% design may give the community a fairly good idea of where they could be, how high they could be in each location, and their approximate alignments. And we're anticipating 30% designs in a year or so.
So it maybe even before that, let's let Angela talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. We could get more detailed flood wall designs included in the 30% design set. Right now, we've averaged our flood wall heights since it's more of a preliminary alternatives analysis phase. So we have sections where we've identified along the creek approximately how high within that section the flood wall will be.
So you can find that in the report right now and probably locate your area.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm sorry, Angela. I apologize for interrupting you. Were you done responding to that question?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next person to ask a question will be America Sosa. America, please unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
Have you determined yet how much changes to private structures will have to happen? I'm talking about buildings and things in people's yards that they like. How much would have to be changed?
I don't think we know yet. I think these are very preliminary designs. We are looking at emphasizing the work on the San Mateo County side of the creek for now because it is predominantly in public ownership, understanding that private ownership properties come with some potential complexities. There are some widening opportunities on the Santa Clara County side of the creek. We will be evaluating what is most advantageous and what is most feasible given our circumstances. Those details have not been developed yet.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'd like to add the comment from Mr. Thomas Reinflisch. His comment is, emphasize that up until the Pope Chaucer Bridge is replaced late in the project, the current capacity of the bridge is 5,400 cubic feet per second, which can still cause massive flooding in the Crescent Park, and the downstream widening will be an improvement waiting to be used. So, Tom, appreciate your point. Working from downstream to upstream is what we need to do. These are all linked actions, and we absolutely understand the imperative of replacing the Pope Chaucer Bridge. The next question or comment we have is from Jonathan Green, who asks, could the sedimentation issue cause a late reset to your plan? How can this be mitigated? Great question. I'm hoping my colleagues can chime in and add a little bit to my brief explanation, but Stanford University is responsible for the Searsville project. According to California law, they have to mitigate for the impacts of their project. So is it a potential risk? Yes. They are responsible for addressing that risk.
What about the Newell Bridge? What does it happen if you change it to be more capacity?
I will take that question out of order. So the city of Palo Alto is responsible for the Newell Road Bridge project. They have won approval from Caltrans. They have funding from both the Measure S dollars from the Santa Clara Valley Water District and Caltrans. They have released their request for proposal for design engineers and consultants to support their work. That will begin, construction will begin next summer's construction season. When that bridge is replaced, it opens up the capacity very much like channel widening would open up capacity. So it is a very positive action that needs to be taken for increasing channel capacity.
And I'll quickly jump in there. I know Michelle from the city of Palo Alto has made a slight clarification to what we said. She says that the construction contract for Newell Road Bridge is scheduled to be awarded later this month. Construction will start this summer, not next year, and the project is anticipated to take approximately 1.5 years to complete.
Excellent information. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Shawnee. Shawnee, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, I'm Shani Kleinhaus with the Santa Clara Valley Bird Alliance and have been working on the issues of bird collisions for a very, very long time. In a location on a creek, having glass that is transparent, even if it has some marking on it, like what you'd call bird-safe glass, will probably not work well enough. And so I would greatly discourage any kind of transparent construction along the creek corridor. That's where the birds are. That's where they'll collide. And I've been working on this for a long time with a network all over the US. Everybody would tell you, who understands this issue will tell you, please don't. So that's my comment. Even if it's only 3 feet, the location really is problematic for that. Thank you.
Johnny, thank you for your very helpful comment and illustrative information. We appreciate that. Another question that we have from Jonathan Green is, how can we be confident that funding will materialize in time? Very good question. I know that we have committed members of the JPA who are devoted to solving this problem once and for all, and who I think have a desire and a creative and committed spirit. So we've done it before. We have some history with the Reach One project being successfully locally funded. I'm confident and optimistic that we can do this. We do have to have funding in place before we can issue requests for proposal for the work. But again, we've done this before in the Reach One project, and as we work in phases, we can fund this in phases as well.
Okay, our next question comes from Brielle. Brielle, you may unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, this is Steve Schmidt. Brielle is sitting next to me, but we had a question about the cost sharing concept and how that would be structured. Would it be applied to jurisdictions? Would it be applied to property owners inside a flood-prone portion of the watershed? Or how exactly do you envision this coming to fruition?
Great question. At this time, we are not looking at reaching out to individual property owners. There are board members who are interested in exploring a community facilities district of some kind that could create an assessment district within the bounds of those impacted by flooding. That is at the very beginning preliminary stages, and no actions have been taken towards that now. We are more likely to see sooner success, especially for the initial implementation phases of the creek widening work, by looking at the resources we already have. So we have some grant funding. We have Measure S funding from the Santa Clara Valley Water District. And we have commitments from our member agencies to participate in this collaborative funding agreement. So the exact details are not yet worked out. Again, we have a track record of having done it in the past and committed members. So I'm confident that we will reach an agreement.
Okay, thank you, Margaret.
Kindly welcome. Mr. Tom Reinflisch asks in the Q&A, isn't it likely that flood insurance costs will decrease even with reaching containment of a 70-year flood, since flood depths at various areas will be reduced? Mr. Reinfleisch, I think you are right. I think the risk, I think especially in the FEMA newly adjusted rate setting and actuarial processes, I think will probably result in eventually rate decreases, even though we are not taking the communities out of the 100-year floodplain. There may be some information available on the FEMA website. If you go to, I think it's FEMA 2.0, and you can read more about that if you're interested in how FEMA's changed their actuarial assessment of risk.
Do they exist anymore?
Do we have any more hands? Okay, I'll keep reading. From Mr. Jeffrey Shore, we have this comment in figure 20 on page 61 of the study. Could you explain the significance of each of the lines, the dashed, dotted, etc., and confirm whether and where the water surface elevation forecasted after the implementation of alternative 1 would exceed the natural top of bank, but would not exceed the height of the relevant flood control improvements, e.g. flood walls? Mr. Shore, I'm wondering, this may be a more technical question than we can answer today on this webinar. We will be making note of all of the questions, and all of the answers to them will be compiled, and we will post this on the website following in the following days. You ask a good question. It's more detailed than we can answer at this moment. So hold that thought. We'll be back to you. Catherine Todd writes, no question, just wanted to express gratitude for this really thoughtful presentation and all the work behind it. Catherine, that's so kind of you. Thank you very much. I have a fabulous team and they do great work. Ms. Bonnie Stein writes, what took so long to repair the Newell Road Bridge since the accident occurred in 1998 and nothing has been done? That's a complicated question and a complicated answer. What took so long is getting the Reach One project done first. Then it took Palo Alto waging righteous battle with Caltrans to get the right funding for the project. It isn't an excuse, but it is a reason. Funding for these projects and their design takes a long time. Jeff Levinsky writes, there are 70-year and 100-year flood levels, or are the 70-year and 100-year flood levels based on historic data, or do they take into account increased rainfall that climate change models suggest is likely? And I see that our colleague Angela Hogan is typing an answer, and they are based on historic data. And you bring up a very good point about climate change and the increased variability of precipitation, and as we've seen in recent years, the intensity of atmospheric rivers. So our project has to do some looking in the rearview mirror to predict the future. But one of the reasons we have structured our evaluation the way we have is so that the work that we do can layer on additional steps in the future, knowing that we have an uncertain, unpredictable, and probably more dangerous future. We will need to build in additional resiliency as we go into the future. So very good point, and thank you for that question.
Hey, Margaret, we have a comment that was submitted by Jim Wiley, who has asked that his comment be read into the record. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Jim Wiley is the Miller Park resident. Mr. Wiley says, given that the staff recommendation is to pursue only a flood wall-based solution, I can no longer in good faith support the JPA's interim goal of a short-term 7,200 CFS project. This proposal would cause immense and irreversible damage to the environment along the creek, cost approximately $250 million, and do almost nothing to remove residents from FEMA flood insurance requirements. There simply isn't enough return on investment to justify that kind of expenditure, especially when so few homeowners would see relief from flood insurance premiums. And if there's little personal financial benefit, very few will vote for a bond measure to help fund the project. The reality is that the JPA doesn't have the funds to build this project outright. It would require new taxes or assessments on the very homeowners it is supposed to protect. Yet, for roughly the same $250 million, we could pursue a far better alternative, one that protects homes without destroying trees, without dividing properties, without leaving residents still stuck with FEMA insurance costs. I'm referring to the underground diversion tunnel. This is a technically sound and environmentally superior solution that could be routed from upstream of the Pope Chaucer Bridge deep underground to the bay, bypassing the most constrained and ecologically sensitive segments of the creek. And here's the critical point. The tunnel would eliminate the need for any downstream construction, including no creek widening, no removal or modification of the Pope Chaucer Bridge, and most importantly, no flood walls. Not through backyards, not across neighborhoods, and no trenching that would destroy the root systems of our century-old native oak trees. By completely removing the FEMA floodplain designation, the tunnel would free every property owner in the current zone from having to pay flood insurance. That's a real measurable benefit with lasting financial value. Unlike the flood wall proposal, which homeowners are already mobilizing against, the tunnel-based solution is one that residents would likely support. In fact, I believe many property owners who stand to benefit from flood insurance relief would willingly vote for a bond measure to help fund its construction. The value is clear, the protection is permanent, and the impacts are minimal compared to the disruption flood walls would bring to their communities. I've spent years defending the oak trees and open space that define this corridor, but now the proposed flood walls directly threaten my own home. Under this plan, our property would be split into two. Our house left outside the flood wall, the remainder trapped inside. That alone would undermine the value of land we were counting on selling to fund our upcoming move to a life care retirement community. This plan is neither just nor effective. It's time for the JPA to lead with vision, not short-term expediency, invest in the tunnel, provide the community with real protection through a solution people can support and vote for. Jim Wiley. Margaret, you're on mute.
I want to thank Jim Wiley for his comments, understanding his concerns and that they are shared by many, particularly in Menlo Park. I want to reassure Mr. Wiley that we are going to be looking at a bypass tunnel. We will be asking for a technical analysis, at least like a literature search level technical analysis of the feasibility and potential scope of cost for such an endeavor. We looked at this as part of the original environmental impact report, and it was set aside at that time as being infeasible. However, times have changed, technology has improved. The costs for that kind of work may have come down, so we will be taking a look at it. Depending on the outcome of that evaluation, we will take it to another level, a more detailed analysis. And it will be something we'll be working on over this summer in parallel with our other work. So we hear you, we're interested in it as well, and we're committed to finding out how effective it could be at this time with, again, new costs because the technologies have improved. I want to move on to other comments that have been posted into the Q&A. I'm seeing a comment from,
Zena Hammer has her hand raised.
Oh, let's please go there. I just saw a question and now it's like, poof, disappeared. Please.
Angela's probably answering it.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
All right. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Cynthia. Thank you.
Hello. So this is Xenia Hammer. I live in Palo Alto. On the subject of flood walls, If you look at the report and if you look at the creek now, there are flood walls on the stretch of the creek in Reach 2. Can you give us a sense for how the proposed flood walls compare with current flood walls height-wise? If you look at the presentation, and I try to look at it in detail, there are significant stretches where the proposed flood walls would actually be comparable to what there is now. Can you just give us a little bit more of a sense of that, please?
Yeah, there are some locations where there are existing flood walls along the creek, and in those locations, what we've proposed is matching those existing wall elevations. And so in some areas, you'll actually see in the report, and this is in regards to figures 20 and figure 21, you'll see some areas where our proposed flood walls are higher and it looks obviously higher in those sections because we're matching to existing wall elevations. However, in some sections, it's not technically necessary to match to those existing wall elevations. So that would be something that we could optimize when we go further into the design phase for the project. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, so I just want to really just kind of understand this a little better. When we're talking about flood walls, we are really matching what there is in place already.
Only in some locations. In other locations, we're actually proposing completely new flood walls.
Okay, and that's to be developed in detail.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mika, do we have any other raised hands?
We have no more raised hands right now, but we do have another question from Tom Reinfleisch. Do you have I'm sorry?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have any demographic data on attendance to this web meeting? At least how many tuned in? And yes, Tom, we can tell you how many tuned in, and I can send that information at the conclusion of this meeting.
So we want to make sure that you know that this is not a limited time offer. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to contact us in the future. You can find the report that we've been referencing on our website. If you go to the SFCJPA.org website and look under the Reach 2 project tab, you can find this document, its attachments and appendices, as well as other reference documents that you may find useful and informative. If you have any last questions or comments, we welcome them now. And if anything occurs to you in the future, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll give it a couple of minutes for people to have a Zen moment of contemplation. And if anybody has any other comments or questions, otherwise we'll call it a wrap at let's call it 7:30. Oh, Shawnee Kleinhaus, you have your hand raised. Did you have a question or a comment, Shawnee?
I guess related to something you said before, and I'm just curious. You said that the Searsville project will have to mitigate any impacts downstream, but is it possible that this project will make the Searsville project unfeasible because they'll have to mitigate a lot more and it's going to get more costly and more difficult, and then the Searsville project will not happen? Like, what is the relationship here? And what is it in terms of feasibility, I guess?
That is a brilliant question, Shawnee. Thank you for that. They are related. The creek, as you know, is one contiguous ecosystem and hydrological system. The sediment that's trapped behind the Searsville Dam is something that Stanford needs to take into account. How they do their fish passage restoration and Searsville Reservoir Restoration Project has to take into account what our project design looks like. They can't do very much work on their project design until we have a pretty good idea of exactly what our project design is. And we come first. Again, that downstream to upstream approach. So we are very closely linked. We want to be considerate of our upstream neighbors, but they have to be keenly aware of our project design goals and constraints as they design their project. What that means in terms of their eventual ability to complete their project, I can't even guess. I don't have anywhere near enough information to speculate on that. But we are communicating. We have regular coordination calls with Stanford. We are aware of each other's work. We collaborate as much as we can. Yes, Shawnee.
So as a conversation, I'm sorry, just since there is time. What is better for the neighbors that are being considered because they got flooded to have the Searsville project done or this project done first? I'm not asking in terms of jurisdictions. Each jurisdiction is trying to accomplish their project. But overall, what may be better for the people downstream in the environment?
From a hydrological standpoint, I'm going to pass on that and see if I can tap my more technical colleagues to answer that question. My instinct is our project first, but I want the experts to weigh in.
Working from upstream to downstream, our project would go first, and our project would have direct benefits for flood risk reduction and the multiple benefits that we've talked about. Stanford's project would go after. It's in the upper watershed. And what their project is planning is to continue to temporarily detain up to 800 CFS, just like the current dam does, so that it reduces the peak flow downstream. And I think they're trying to make sure that their project will continue to do that.
Okay, any last comments or questions? Again,
Jeffrey Shore has a comment in the chat. He writes, the alternatives report appears to indicate that a 1-foot freeboard safety buffer is used to take into account uncertainty. Does this represent a reduction of existing freeboard in any locations? If so, where?
To answer that kind of short, no, it does not. It does not create any reduction of existing freeboard. And I was actually responding to your previous comment as well, Jeffrey, about figures 20 and 21. We're providing more freeboard right now than the existing creek has, and we're also reducing the water surface elevations from the existing conditions. So we would not be reducing that existing freeboard that you're asking about.
thank you, Angela. Do we have any other hands raised or comments or questions? Okay, then I think I will call it an evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. We appreciate your attention, your time, your interest, your questions and comments. If you have any other comments or questions, please don't hesitate to email us or call us. Also, if in the future, please keep an eye out in our newsletter. If you would like to subscribe to our newsletter, you can do that online. I'd like to do some tours of the creek in the summertime, and those are a great way to learn about the ecosystem of the creek and some of our project ideas. So we'll be doing a couple of creek tours later this summer as well. A couple of other people are curious about the attendance on the call today. I think I saw a high water mark of 59 attendees, so I don't know the exact demographics, but if we can tease that out, we'll put that in our report along with answers to questions. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time. Until next time, thank you very much.